Hello and good morning everyone. So we are based at African University for Humanity and Applied Sciences, English Department, and your class is Translation Interpretation EN 318. And for today's presentation, we'll be looking at source text analysis and translation methodology as a new lecture. But for source text analysis, we'll be finishing what we started in our previous class, where we looked into the source text analysis, the features of text analysis. We started it with macro analysis, and we looked at the features of macro analysis. Okay, so for the upcoming two slides, we'll be talking about micro analysis and analyzing promotional and advertising text, and then we'll have the study questions of our previous class. Okay, and then we start our new lesson, and that's the translation methodology. It's very important in studying translation or understanding the method, strategies, and techniques of translation. So this is your second lecture, part 2 of the second lecture for 2020-2021. So now we'll be looking at our second slide at the macro analysis. We'll be looking or studying features of macro analysis. They're different from what we had of macro analysis. So don't mix between the macro and micro analysis. Please take notes and look at them very well. And let's start. So now the turn is for micro analysis. What is it? What's micro analysis? It's different from macro analysis. And we'll be looking at features of micro analysis: lexical features, grammatical and textual features. Again, under grammatical features and textual features, we have coherence, links between the structure, the sentences, and everything. And one last feature of micro analysis is stylistic features. And we'll be looking at register under the stylistic features. And finally, we come to our last text analysis feature as analyzing promotional and advertising texts. Okay, so micro analysis, what is it? Comes after macro analysis and is carried out through a close reading of the source text. So we need to do rigorous and close reading to the source text, the text that we want to translate. The aim of microanalysis is to identify the nature of the writer's language and the style in the view of the text context, theme, communicative function, text genre, contextual focus, and audience and tone. So style is the writer's particular use of language, the way that authors write, or the style that authors would write the text, serving a given rhetorical or communicative functions. As we said, purpose, they have their own purpose, غرض معين. And therefore motivated by these functions as regards such aspects as syntactic structure, vocabulary selection, and textual properties. The writer's choice of syntactic formulation, تراكيب النحوية, vocabulary items, مفردات, and stylistic devices, والأدوات الأسلوبية, is also motivated by the subject matter. صلب الموضوع يعني قد يكون كيميائي, علمي, قانوني, أدبي, وإلى ما لا نهاية. Being treated, targeted, actual or potential audience, and the intended effect. So we do all this sort of analysis in order to reach our goal in rendering a text from source language to target language. And there are some aspects or features under this microanalysis, and that's we start with the lexical features, and we get to know what is it. In identifying the lexical features of a text, translators identify the overall nature of words used by the source text author. morphologically, semantically, simple or complex, modern or general or technical, familiar or idiosyncratic. So we'll be looking at the lexical features that was used by the author. وندير لها التحليل. At this stage, translators identify any keywords in the text. المفاتيح الكلمات المفتاحية يعني متاع النص. Main words or terms representing the topic. And cultural references. If we have expressions referring to the source text, culture or another culture, such as food names, names of customs and traditions, idioms or proverbs. So all this needs to be put into consideration, and that according to lexical features. Special collocations. Sometimes you have special collocations where two words collocate to one another. Unfamiliar combination of words. Okay? And newly created general technical words and expressions. Foreign expressions. Expressions from a language other than the source text language. Sometimes some of the borrowing words, you find them in the text that we translated into target language. Or abbreviations. Of course, you need to look into abbreviations like UNESCO, for instance, United Nations for blah blah blah. Or short forms of words and phrases such as ref from reference and USA from United States of America, and also acronyms, initials of a set of words. For instance, UNESCO for United Nations Education, Science and Culture Organization. So all of this needs to be interpreted and analyzed under the lexical features. How about the grammatical and textual features? النصية والتركيبية والنحوية. السمات النصية والتركيبية والنحوية تحتاج إلى تحليل أيضا. So the source text, grammatical and textual features, translators identifying the nature of sentences, long or short, simple or complex, semantically clear or ambiguous, هل فيها لبس مثلا. This is important for translation because the nature of source text sentence reflects the nature of the author's style, and the simplicity or complexity of a topic or event being treated. Translators find out if the writer is relying heavily on verbs or nouns, adjectives or adverbs, active or passive, verbalization or normalization, بداية الجمل الاسمية أو الفعلية, normal or abnormal use of punctuation marks, استخدام ال punctuation marks, الروابط وأدوات الترقيم وغيرها. At this stage, it's important for translators to get a general view of how the text is structured. بالنقطة هذه حيتعرف المترجم إلى تركيبة النص الشاملة اللي هي تحتاج إلى ترجمة إلى لغة الهدف. This is because the way a text is organized into paragraphs, sentences and units creates a framework for developing its argument and logic. Okay, relevant to this is to identify how the text achieves both cohesion and coherence. So what's a cohesion? Is a network of lexical and grammatical relations or ties between various parts of the text. الربط ما بين التراكيب النحوية والكلمات. Connections between textual units such as words, phrases, and sentences. These are relations organize and create a text by requiring the reader to interpret words and expressions by reference to other words and expressions in the surrounding sentences and paragraphs. So the main cohesive devices, for instance, reference. Look at this example. Ellie came in. He was late and his car was broken. So Ellie and he and his are all reference. They refer to one another. So here we've seen a cohesion. ربط ما بين الجمل. ونعرف مثلا هي لمن تعود. نعرف his لمن تعود. Substitution. الاستبدال. And does she sing? هل هي تغني? No, but I do. So you see the replacement or the substitution of do. هي لا تغني ولكن أنا أفعل. Conjunction. Use of conjunctions such as and, but, or also, then, next, however, etc. And also ellipses, one of the cohesive devices. Omission. Do you smoke? No. الإجابة بقصيرة تقول no. خلاص وأسقط باقي الكلام ما تقولش no I don't smoke. Okay? So you see these are the cohesive devices. Now we move into coherence. Refers to the way a text makes sense to the reader through the organization of its content and the relevance and clarity of its concepts and ideas. The flow of information and making sense. For example, a paragraph has coherence if it's a series of sentences that develop a main idea. So topic sentence supporting sentence with coherence التماسك وانسجام النص لما يكون فيه انسجام وترابط. هذا الcohesion and cohesion. بينما تجد الجملة الرئيسية في مكان وتجد الكلام الآخر في مكان آخر، يعني يكون النص في تشتت. A text is the result of the interaction between knowledge presented in a text and the reader's own knowledge and experiences of the world. Through analysis, translators identify the functions of textual structures that serve the main purpose of the source text. This enables the translator to make informed decisions related to the linguistic structures needed for the TT. TT, we said it stands for the target translation or target text in a new context. Okay, so now we look into stylistic features الأسلوبية أو سمات الأسلوبية. In identifying these stylistic features, translators recognize the types of features reflecting the predominant contextual focus of the style. Okay, what is it? narration, instructions, analysis. مرات تعليمية زي ما مثلا نشروا آلة معينة نلقوا فيها كتيب صغير يعطيك instructions تعليمات ولا تحتاج إلى ترجمة. analysis مرات قد يكون نص تحليلي. هذا the stylistic feature أسلوبية الكلام أو الحدث. discussion مرات نقاش، مرات dialogue حوار، على حسب. مرات يكون قلنا description يصف الشيء. These features are related to textual organization, grammatical structures, and vocabulary items of the text. Translators note any special stylistic devices in the text, such as fronting, repetition, use of short or long sentences, and redundancy. حشو الكلام. Translators also identify figures of speech, metaphor البديعية، سمات البديعية، simile التشابه، personification, and sound effects ومؤثرات الصوت like alliteration, assonance, rhyme, rhythm, especially the contextual focus of the ST is expressive. It's also important for the translator to identify when and how the author has deviated from standard grammar or syntax and why. So yeah, we run all this analysis in order to reach to our good translation of a text. One of the features and the stylistic features is register, which is very important to look into. It's an important aspect of the way language is used. It's the way language use varies according to the variations in the relevant context. It's argued that there is a systematic correlation between the type of language use and feature of social context. The choice of linguistic structures and vocabulary is governed by cultural and contextual factors such as the field of discourse or subject matter being treated, the tenor, formal and informal relationship between the discourse participant and the mode of the discourse, whether the language is written or spoken. Analysis. The concept of register discourse is useful in explaining the predicting the relationship between features of context and features of text. So translators need to identify if the source text register is personal or impersonal, and formal or informal, and so on. So that's it. We need to differentiate or decide whether a text is formal or informal. That's what the register is for. Now we move into our last feature of text analysis, and that's analyzing promotional advertising text. This is very important, and this you may face in magazines and newspapers and daily newspapers. Promotional advertising texts are multimodal in nature. In analyzing them, translators identify the linguistic elements and visual features, including colors. Sometimes you need to process colors, font size, images, simple and logos, as well as the interaction and functions in the text. A business advertisement, for instance, consists of a headline, a photo or image, logo, body copy, call to action, and contact information. As in any piece of advertisement, you may find all this information. So when you render it, you need to be precise to render everything there to be real. The headline is the main element in the advertisement as it attracts readers' attention and summarizes the advertising message. يعني ديما العنوان في أي إعلان يكون هو البارز بحيث أنه يجذب انتباه القارئ والمشاهد والزبائن بشكل عام، وأيضا يحاول أن يوصل رسالة المحتوى لهذا الإعلان. مثلا برودكت معين، ناخذ منتج معين نديروا له لوجوز ودعاية وإعلان معين ونجوا نعلنه. في الحالة هذه يستقطبنا، يستقطب المشتري والزبون بحيث أنه يقتني هذا الأمر. Okay, so that's it about all text analysis. And now let's move into the study guide. Thank you. So this slide, I included the study questions for our previous class, the one we had on the first presentation, on the previous presentation. I want you to go through the questions and try to answer these following questions that I won't be reading for you. You read it and answer it and submit it to me. Thank you. And let's move to the upcoming slide. So now let's start our new lecture. For this lecture, our new topic, and that's translation methodology. We get to know what's translation methodology. So it has already been mentioned that one of the goals of translation theory, نظرية الترجمة, is to provide translators with guidelines، بخطوط توفر للمترجمين خطوط عريضة for the production of translation، إنتاج عملية الترجمة. That's to say, provide them with some kind of translation methodology. Following Newmark, translation theory goes hand in hand with translation methodology at every stage. But what's translation methodology? We always have this question. What is it? According to Collins' dictionary, a methodology is a system of methods, منظومة من الأدوات and principles for doing something. Okay? So أنت لأي ترجمة نص تحتاج إلى أدوات بحيث أن أنت تدير أو آلية يعني. Based on this, translation methodology can be defined initially as the systematic use of methods and principles والمبادئ in the process of translation or translating a text from one language into another. Based on above suggested definition of translation, this initial definition of translation methodology can be refined as the one you see on the slide. So let's read it together. هذا 1 minute to read it. Translation methodology is the systematic use of methods and principles in reproducing user-oriented source text message in an appropriate form in a target language with the aim of creating a pragmatically equivalent and functionally adequate target text. So it's worth mentioning that the term translation methodology is also used in target source or in TS to mean a set of translation methods, because the translation process with its 3 interrelated phases: source text comprehension DST, source text comprehension, target text production الإنتاج النص الهدف المقابل, and a TT revision, target text revision, represents the translator's mental activities during the actual active translating. It's adopted methodologically as a framework for translation teaching and learning. In other words, the teaching and learning or learning process follows the translator's mental activities by teaching source text comprehension, target text production, and target text revision. The methodological use of the translation process, be sure, with its 3 phases in teaching and learning translation, provides learners with a general framework of translation methodology. So yeah, because methodology in general involves the systematic use of steps, methods and procedures تحتاج إلى إجراءات، والإجراءات هي تكلمنا عنها، مثلا تحليل النص، نديروا تحليل النص الشامل، Microanalysis and other procedures وإجراءات أخرى. But practicing translation according to defined methodology enables students to conceptualize the links between aspects of translation process and product وإنتاج الترجمة, and develop systematically in analysis and senses. Translation methodology can also enable students, trainees, to internalize theoretical knowledge and develop their own theories of translation. The 3 translation phases will be further explained and practiced in following each chapter on the following slides. So let's check this slide: translation methods, strategies and techniques. What do translators need to render the text from one language into another? We've already been talking about, we've always touched on, they need certain procedures, certain methods, certain techniques. So in referring to the ways or modes adopted by translators in rendering text from one language into another, 4 terms are used: method, strategy, technique and procedure, إجراءات. So one scholar used the term methods of translation as an umbrella term, كالمصطلح الغطائي يعني المظلة, to refer to the ways or modes adopted by translators in transferring the meaning of a text from one language into another, which they call procedures. Let's check Newmark. What did Newmark say? Uses the term method in referring to the general approach or mode adopted by translator in dealing with the source text as a whole. So for instance, you're given a certain text and you're asked to render it to target language. Of course, as a professional translator, you're going to follow certain steps to render the text well into target language. So all the steps you've taken are called methods. So is it clear now? Or procedures. For the way or mode of transferring the meaning of particular ST item. Newmark clearly states that while translation methods relate to whole text, Translation procedures are used for sentence and smaller units of language. So he makes a difference between methods and procedures. He says procedures deal with sentences and smaller units of language. حاجات مجزئة صغيرة يعني مش زي methods. Method deals with the whole text. One another scholar use the term strategy for both the general mode of text printing, which they call macro strategy, and for the transfer operation performed in a specific source text item, which they call micro strategy. Baston speaks of local strategy and global strategy. And other scholars use the term translation technique to refer to the way or mode of translating, transferring, نقل the meaning of a particular source text item. However, one or some other scholars, علماء ترجمة آخرين, use the term translation strategy, استراتيجية الترجمة, to refer to what other writers call translation technique, يعني استخدموها interchangeably. في بعضهم من سموها translation technique تقنية الترجمة، وفي بعضهم أو أداة الترجمة، وفي من سماها إجراءات الترجمة to refer to what other writers call translation technique or translation procedure أو إجراءات الترجمة. Baker, she's an Egyptian scholar, uses the term strategy in a sense of the way or mode adopted by professional translators in solving non-equivalence problems. Thus, Baker links translation strategy to translation problems, and the above examples show that different scholars or writers use terms differently, leading to different classifications, تصنيفات مختلفة, thus creating terminological confusion or overlapping. In other words, the same concept is expressed with different names, and the classifications vary, covering different areas of translation problems. So that's it. Yes. See, they seem, some scholars seem to use the translation method, strategy, and techniques or procedures. They use them as if interchangeably. Each wants to use a term for a particular type of dealing with transferring a text from a source language into a target language and vice versa. And now, here, let's move into more detailed of these terminology. Like we'll be looking at translation method, what is it? We'll be looking at translation strategy and translation technique for the coming slide. So now let's look at the following terminologies: translation methods, strategies, and techniques separately. This is a translation method. This is what is it? This is the generic umbrella or subordinate term referring to any mode of translation at any level of the source text. It's usually used collectively. Translation method to refer to two types of translation methods: macro level methods, translation strategy, and micro level methods, that's translation technique. It's worth pointing out here that in practice, some methods, literal translation and adaptation, are used at both macro and micro levels. So as translation strategies and translation techniques, how about the translation strategy? Generally, you know, a strategy is a plan that's intended to achieve a particular purpose. So in this context, it's the pre-translating plan adopted by the translators in dealing with the source text as a whole. In other words, it's a global or holistic approach to task. يعني ككل يعني مهمة عامة تشير لها. Translation strategy is a translator's overall game plan. Consists of a set of strategic decisions taken after initial reading of the source text. But before starting detailed translation of it, the pre-translation selection of a translation strategy is essential action towards achieving the desired reception and function of the translation in a target language. The selection of one translation strategy or another is either indicated by the translation brief or decided by the translator based on his analysis of the source text and his assumption about the translator's audience and function. Based on a selected strategy, the translator will use the appropriate translation techniques that serve the translation strategy in achieving the translation's function. So that's it. We use different types of strategies in order to reach our goal of translating a text. How about the translation technique? Is the transference mode or procedure opted for اختيرت for by the translator in rendering micro level, يعني the one we talked about, of the source text. Word, abbreviation, phrase, sentence, or feature, sound effect in a specific context. So translation techniques are used to deal with the challenges as they arise in a translation process. Translation strategies are macro level oriented methods, while translation techniques are micro level oriented methods. So example of translation techniques are literal translation, calque, borrowing, transposition, and modulation. So that's mainly the translation technique or the other other strategy or procedures of the translation. بمختصر المفيد يعني المترجم عليه أن يأخذ أدوات أو إجراءات معينة أو تقنيات معينة، بحيث أن لما بيحاول نقل نص من لغة المصدر إلى لغة الهدف هناك خطوات يأخذها في عين الاعتبار، بحيث أن يتضمن كل الحلول لإيصال الفكرة أو نقل الترجمة بمهنية عالية وتفيد الغرض. هذا هو في الواقع في هذه الميثودولوجي، يعني في طرائق الترجمة.